You hate your art for a reason, usually more than one reason, actually. Creative people are talented at building cathedrals of misery from multiple architectural styles. Still, one reason towers above the rest. You hate your art because it reveals the distance between your vision and your ability. That distance feels humiliating. It is not merely that the work is bad. Plenty of things are bad without causing spiritual injury. A burnt piece of toast is bad. A cheap motel towel is bad. A meeting that should have been an email is bad. None of these produce existential pain. Your art does. Because your art came from inside the part of you that hoped to prove something, and then it failed. Or at least, that is how it feels. You sat down with a sense of what you wanted. Maybe it was a painting, a song, a chapter, a scene, a design, a poem, a film idea, a sculpture, a melody, a visual world, a sentence with enough force in it to make the room feel different after it landed. You had the thing in your head. It was alive there. It had majesty there. It glowed there. In the mind, your work was not clumsy. It was not compromised. It was not generic. It was not second rate. It was not a limp approximation of someone else's better instinct. It was yours, and it felt whole. Then you made it, and now it sits in front of you like evidence from a trial you are losing. That is why people hate their art. The art is no longer an imagined possibility. It has become a material object. It now occupies space in the world. It can be seen, played, read, watched, heard, compared, judged. Worst of all, you can compare it not merely to other works, but to the invisible work you meant to create. That comparison is savage. The thing in your head was radiant. The thing on the page looks like it got lost on the way home. That hurts because the work feels like a referendum on the self. You do not look at it and think, well, that attempt fell short. You think something much crueler. You think, this is what I am capable of. This is the real me, stripped of fantasy. This is the gap between my ambition and my actual stature. This ugly little object is the truth, and all my grand self-conceptions were fraud. That is why the hatred feels so hot. The art does not seem like a failed product. It seems like a failed revelation. You hoped the work would reveal depth, refinement, sensitivity, genius, power, beauty, wit, command, vision, or at least some honorable fragment of these things. Instead, it reveals awkwardness, thinness, cliché, technical weakness, derivative choices, incoherent form, a line that sounds false, a color that dies on the canvas, a melody that never rises, a scene with no pulse, a paragraph that says the thing with all the force of damp cardboard. And now your own work is staring back at you. That is the material reminder of failure. It is one thing to suspect you are falling short of yourself. It is another to have proof stacked in folders, hard drives, notebooks, sketch pads, drafts, canvases, voice memos, and half-finished projects staring at you. Naturally, people hate their art. There is also a deeper shame involved. You are not ashamed merely because the work is bad. You are ashamed because you expected better from yourself. The work offends the self-image. You thought you were the kind of person who could make something finer than this, more original, more moving, more disciplined, more beautiful, more exact, more alive. When the finished thing fails to carry that weight, it does not merely disappoint you, it accuses you. It says, apparently not. Apparently, you are not yet the person you thought you were. Apparently, your taste outruns your craft. Apparently, your standards are taller than your current strength. Apparently, your inner identity and your outer ability are not even sleeping in the same house. That is an ugly realization. Many creative people spend years trying to avoid it. Some stop making work altogether because unfinished work remains innocent. Unfinished work can still be imagined as brilliant. A blank canvas has never humiliated anyone quite as cruelly as a finished bad one. A draft half written still contains possibility. A completed draft contains verdict. This is why so many people live in the warm fog of potential. Potential does not bleed. Finished work does. Others keep making art but learn to hate the process because every completed piece becomes another confrontation with the gap. They are not really working on the project anymore. They are reenacting an old disappointment with better software. This is one reason artists become perfectionists. Perfectionism is often described as high standards. Sometimes. Often, it is shame management. The perfectionist is trying to avoid the moment when the work becomes concrete enough to betray him. He edits endlessly, polishes compulsively, restarts, revises, delays, tinkers, rearranges, hides. He is not only improving the work, he is delaying judgment. He is trying to keep the art suspended in a state where it has not yet failed him in public. There is a dark comedy in this. The artist wants to make something alive, so he keeps it in the womb until it suffocates. A very efficient system. Another reason you hate your art is that your taste developed faster than your skill. This happens constantly, especially in the early and middle years of serious creative life. You know what good art feels like. You can recognize greatness. You can feel form, power, style, atmosphere, emotional truth, symbolic richness, rhythm, proportion, grace. You can tell when other people are doing something marvelous. That is why you wanted to create in the first place. You fell in love with the great works. You sensed the heights. You developed the appetite before you developed the muscles. So now you are cursed with discernment. You can see exactly how your own work falls short. This is miserable, but it is also the sign that you are not hopeless. Truly hopeless artists often lack the taste to know they are bad. They stride into the room, grinning with unspeakable confidence, holding some monstrous little project together with jargon and self regard, fully convinced they have changed the world. That sort of delusion can be professionally useful, though aesthetically catastrophic. The more serious artist suffers more because he can feel the difference between what he made and what he hoped to make. That pain is part of growth. It does not feel noble when you are in it, of course. It feels like licking a battery. Still, it matters. Your hatred of your art often means that your standards are alive. It means your inner eye has not gone dull. It means you still know that something finer is possible. That knowledge wounds, but it also guides. The danger comes when you misread the wound. Instead of thinking, my taste exceeds my present ability, so I must keep working, you think, my present ability reveals my true ceiling, so I should despair. That is the mistake. A bad piece of art is not always a prophecy. Often, it is merely a snapshot of an unfinished self. The problem is that creative people rarely experience it that way. They experience the work as destiny. The bad painting is not just today's failed attempt. It becomes proof that their inner magnificence was a fantasy. The weak chapter is not just a weak chapter. It becomes proof that they are counterfeit. The awkward song becomes proof that their soul is a cheap apartment pretending to be a palace. This is why self-loathing and art often become entangled. The artist begins with aspiration. He produces something compromised. He feels ashamed. The shame attaches not only to the work, but to the act of making. The next time he creates, he is no longer working freely. He is working under the gaze of anticipated disappointment. That gaze poisons things. It makes the hands stiff. It makes the imagination fearful. It makes experimentation dangerous. It turns play into risk and risk into self-exposure. A child can draw badly and remain untroubled because the drawing has not yet fused with the ego. An adult artist often cannot. By then, the work has become an X-ray of the soul, or so it seems. And once that happens, every failure feels intimate. There is also the matter of identity. Many creative people do not merely make art, they use art to become themselves. That is a beautiful impulse, but it creates special agony when the work fails. If I am using my art to close the gap between who I am and who I want to be, and the art comes out thin, weak, clumsy, or dishonest, then it seems to widen the gap instead. The very instrument I hoped would redeem me becomes further proof that I remain unreconciled. That can make a person hate the work with surprising ferocity. The canvas, manuscript, or recording is not passive. It appears almost hostile. It says, "You wanted transcendence. Here is your present condition instead. You wanted beauty. Here is your limitation. You wanted self-expression. Here is your incoherence. You wanted greatness. Here is your hand trembling on the page." No wonder people avoid the studio. No wonder they doom scroll instead. The phone, at least, rarely asks whether you are equal to your own ideals. The more ambitious the artist, the sharper this pain becomes. Small ambitions create smaller humiliations. If all you want is to produce something pleasant, you may be disappointed when it comes out mediocre. If what you wanted was sublimity, then mediocrity feels like blasphemy. The soul does not forgive the fall easily. This is why some of the most talented people are the most tortured by their own output. Their ambitions are vertical. They do not want competence. They want contact with something higher. When the work does not achieve that, it can feel dirty in their hands. Not literally dirty, perhaps, spiritually smudged, tainted by compromise. They wanted revelation and got approximation. That is a painful downgrade. Still, there is a healthier way to understand this hatred. You hate your art partly because the work has done you the favor of becoming visible. It has shown you where you really are. Human beings often prefer the blur of self-concept. It is warm there. In the blur, one may still be a genius, a visionary, an unrecognized master, a sleeping lion, a cathedral sealed in scaffolding. Finished work ends the blur. It says, here. Here is what your discipline, taste, patience, technique, honesty, and courage are able to do right now under actual conditions. That revelation stings. It also makes growth possible. A man cannot bridge the distance between himself and his ideal self unless the distance becomes concrete. The work gives the distance a shape. It shows the exact places where vision collapses into cliché, where feeling outruns form, where ambition outruns structure, where skill fails to carry intuition. That is humiliating, yes. It is also useful. The hated artwork can become a map if you stop treating it like an indictment from heaven. This is difficult because shame loves absolutism. Shame never says, this passage is weak. Shame says, you are false. Shame never says, the proportions are off. Shame says, you are a fraud. Shame says, your vision itself was vanity. That is why shame is so destructive to artists. It takes a local failure and turns it into a total identity claim. You have to learn to resist that. You have to say, this work is below my standards because I have standards. This gap hurts because I can see the height. The piece in front of me is not the measure of my ultimate worth. It is evidence of where my present powers break down. Very well. Now I know where to labor. That is a harder, steadier response. Less theatrical, sadly. Fewer opportunities for moonlit despair. Still, it works better. The truth is that the disconnect between who you are and who you want to be is not exposed by art alone. Art merely makes it harder to ignore. Most people carry this disconnect quietly through their work, marriages, ambitions, and inner fantasies. The artist sees it more vividly because he keeps trying to incarnate the self in material form. Once you try to incarnate something, reality gets involved. Reality is a strict editor. That is why art can feel merciless. It takes your inward claim and tests it. Who are you, really? What can you actually do? How much of your taste is embodied? How much of your sensitivity is disciplined? How much of your ambition can survive matter, time, structure, revision, and the resistant stupidity of the real world? Those are hard questions. Your art asks them every time you finish something. And that is precisely why many people hate it. Still, the hatred is not the final truth. Very often, what you hate in your art is the pain of seeing yourself unfinished. That is different from being worthless, different from being talentless, different from being doomed. An unfinished self will make unfinished work. That is not scandalous. That is the human condition. The artist's burden is simply that he gets to see the condition in higher resolution than most people do. So yes, you hate your art because it becomes a material reminder of failure, because it reveals the disconnect between the self you inhabit and the self you long to become, because it falls below your expectations and turns your own standards against you, because it exposes the distance between your inner magnificence and your current means, because it makes shame visible, and visible shame is hard to bear. But that is not all it does. It also places the bridge before you. Each hated work is a broken rung, perhaps. Fine, still a rung. You can climb broken things if there are enough of them. That is the strange mercy in all of this. The very artwork that humiliates you may also be the thing that teaches your hands, your eye, your ear, your judgment, and your soul how to become equal to the vision that first tormented you. The work accuses. Then, if you stay with it long enough, it instructs. And one day, if you are stubborn enough, honest enough, and patient enough, it may stop feeling like a record of your failure and start feeling like evidence that the distance is closing. Not closed, closing. That is usually how grace appears in creative life. Not as instant mastery, as reduced humiliation, as fewer false notes, as moments where the thing on the page begins at last to resemble the thing you once saw in the mind, as fragments of real beauty appearing where once there was only longing and embarrassment. That is enough to keep going. And keeping going, unpleasantly enough, is the whole game. End transmission.